The most recognizable bass line in rock history was almost lost, because the man who played it forgot how it went. 6 notes, everybody knows them. They have been sampled, borrowed, argued over in court, and played by every teenager who has ever picked up a bass guitar. And at some point during the session that produced them, John Deacon walked out for a break, came back, and could not remember what he had just played. Start in Montreux, Switzerland, in July of 1981. Queen owned Mountain Studios there. They had bought it a couple of years earlier, and it sat right on the edge of Lake Geneva, which is a very pleasant place to make a difficult record. They were working on the album that became Hot Space, and it was not going smoothly. The band were pulling in different directions, and the record would go on to become the most argued-about thing they ever released. It is worth understanding what kind of trouble Hot Space was. Queen had spent the 70s building a reputation on layered guitars, operatic vocal stacks, and enormous production. Then they had a global hit with Another One Bites the Dust, which was a funk record, and it changed what they thought they could do. Hot Space pushed hard in that direction. Drum machines, synthesizers, far less guitar. Brian May, whose entire identity was the guitar, was not enthusiastic, and said so at the time and repeatedly since. So the room Bowie walked into was not a happy one. It was 4 people who did not agree about what their band was. In the studio next door was David Bowie. He was in Montreux working with Giorgio Moroder on a song called Cat People for a film soundtrack. Different project, different producer, nothing to do with Queen. But the studios were adjacent, the artists knew each other, and Bowie came over. What happened next was not planned by anybody. There was no collaboration agreed, no label discussion, no writing session in the diary. Bowie originally came in to add some backing vocals to a Queen track called Cool Cat. That is all it was meant to be, a guest vocal on somebody else's song. The Cool Cat session turned into a jam. 4 members of Queen and David Bowie in a room with instruments playing at each other for hours. No structure, no plan, and by every account no small amount of alcohol. This is how the song actually began. Not as an idea somebody had, but as something that emerged out of a long night of 5 musicians not agreeing about anything. Somewhere in that, John Deacon started playing a bass figure. 6 notes, repeated, simple to the point of being almost nothing. He played it over and over while the others worked around it. By the accounts of the people in the room, it was Deacon's. Brian May has said so. Roger Taylor has said so. Bowie himself later said the bass line was already there before he got involved. And then the session broke. They stopped, they went out, they came back. And when they picked it up again, Deacon could not remember the figure he had been playing. Roger Taylor could. He had been listening to it all night from behind the drums, and he played it back to Deacon. Sit with how close that came to nothing. If Taylor had not been paying attention, or had not remembered it accurately, one of the most instantly identifiable pieces of music of the 20th century simply would not exist. It was not written down. It was not recorded yet. It existed only in the memory of the people who happened to be in the room. There is a further wrinkle, and it is the reason the credit has been argued about for 40 years. Brian May has said that Bowie ultimately changed the riff into the form that ended up on the record. So the line as we know it may be Deacon's idea, filtered through Taylor's memory, adjusted by Bowie. Deacon himself mudded it further. In the early 80s, more than once, he told interviewers that Bowie had written it. That is a very Deacon thing to do, and it says something about him. He was the quietest member of Queen by a distance. He wrote Another One Bites the Dust and I Want to Break Free, and he gave interviews so rarely that most fans could not have picked his voice out. Handing credit to the more famous man in the room, twice in public, is entirely consistent with everything else known about him. There is also the question of what the 6 notes actually are. Musically, they are almost nothing. A repeated figure, a small rhythmic hop, and a return. It does not resolve anywhere clever. A first-year bass student can play it inside an hour. That is precisely why it works. It is simple enough to lodge in a listener's head after a single hearing, and open enough that a song can be built on top of it in any direction. The most valuable ideas in popular music are almost never the complicated ones. They are the ones that survive being played badly, on a cheap instrument, by somebody who half remembers them. The recording itself was difficult in a way the finished song does not suggest. Bowie had a specific working method, and it was not Queen's. He wanted things done his way, in his order, with his instincts leading. Brian may put it plainly afterwards. To have his ego mixed with ours, he said, made for a very volatile mixture. Roger Taylor's version is more diplomatic and says the same thing. Certain egos, he said, were slightly bruised along the way. These are the two most restrained statements possible about what was, by every account from inside the room, a genuinely tense few days. One decision from those sessions is worth understanding, because you can hear it in the record. For the vocals, Bowie and Freddie did not simply sing at each other. They worked separately, taking passes without hearing exactly what the other had done, then built the final vocal from the pieces. That is why the two voices on Under Pressure sound like they are circling each other rather than harmonizing. They are not responding to each other. They were never in the same performance. The song came out in October of 1981. It went to #1 in the United Kingdom. It was Queen's second UK #1, 9 years after their first. A song that nobody had set out to write, built on a riff that was nearly forgotten, made by 5 people who spent the session irritating each other, became one of the most successful things any of them ever did. And here is the part that people find hardest to believe. Queen and David Bowie never performed Under Pressure together. Not once. Not on television, not at a benefit, not at any point in the 11 years between the record's release and Freddie Mercury's death. One of the most famous duets in the history of popular music was never once sung live by the two people who sang it. There is no dramatic falling out to explain it, which is somehow worse. They were not enemies. Bowie spoke warmly about Freddie afterwards and about Queen. There was no feud, no lawsuit, no refusal. It simply never happened. Two of the most restlessly active performers of their generation, both constantly on stage, both with the same enormous hits sitting in their catalog, and the diary never lined up. That is how most things that never happen fail to happen, not through a decision, through nobody making one. The opportunity was there, and it was obvious. On the 13th of July, 1985, Queen and David Bowie were both on the bill at Live Aid. Same stadium, same afternoon, same audience of 1 billion people. Queen played their 20 minutes. Bowie played his set. Nobody put the two together, and Under Pressure was not performed at all. So both of them spent the next decade performing it without the other. Bowie played it live with various singers standing in for Freddie's parts. Queen played it live using a pre-recorded Bowie vocal or with a guest. Two men, both performing the same song to large crowds for years, each of them working around a hole shaped like the other one. The song kept growing without either of them doing anything. It has been sampled, most famously and most litigiously by Vanilla Ice, whose Ice Ice Baby used the line without clearance and ended in a settlement that gave Queen and Bowie writing credits. It has soundtracked films, adverts, sporting events, and school talent shows for 4 decades. It is now, by some distance, the most widely recognized thing either party ever put their name to alongside somebody else. All of it resting on 6 notes that existed for a few hours only inside Roger Taylor's head. Freddie Mercury died in November of 1991. The following April, Wembley Stadium hosted the tribute concert, and David Bowie walked out and performed Under Pressure live for the first time. He sang it with Annie Lennox. She took Freddie's lines. That is the only version of this song that was ever performed live by one of the two men who made it. It happened 5 months after the other one was gone. The whole story is in that shape. A song nobody intended to write, a bassline that survived on one man's memory, a credit its own author kept trying to give away. 2 singers who never sang it together, in a room or on a stage at any point in their lives. The version everybody knows is 6 notes and 2 voices that were never actually in the same place. It turns out that is exactly what it sounds like.